Welcome to our podcast series, 5 Questions, 5 Answers, in which we explore recent U.S. trade policies and U.S. trade rules that can affect thousands of companies. We have a goal in mind to help you, the listener, translate the legal into real-world business strategies. My name is Birgit Matthiesen. I'm the Director of North American Manufacturing here at Aaron Fox Schiff in Washington, D.C. I get the easy part. I get to ask the questions, and I get to choose the colleague or the guest I know will have the right answers for you. So in the next few minutes, I will ask 5 questions that reflect the concerns we've been hearing from business leaders, all who want to understand the rules, but they also need to mitigate their business risk while increasing their bottom line. So let's start. We are midsummer of 2025. We've titled this podcast, I hope appropriately, as the Summer of U.S. Tariffs. Maybe we should have titled it the Summer of Global Tariffs, maybe even the Summer of Reciprocal Tariffs. But it's been a few weeks, if not a few months now, of an evolving trade agenda and trade tariff policy from Washington and the capitals around the world. And so we decided this morning that we should use this podcast to bring everyone up to speed. And it is for this reason that I've invited back to the microphone a colleague of mine, James Kim. He is an international trade attorney. He has a particular expertise and deep insight into the sausage making of U.S. tariff policy and the application of these tariffs. He was with the administration, and he was particularly in the ranks of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. He is particularly known, therefore, for his customs practice, and he has advised companies big and small. He also frequently writes and speaks on these emerging trade and import compliance developments. And I'm going to put in a plug for you, James. He is the founder and editor-in-chief of the very popular As the Customs and Trade World Turns. It's a trade-focused newsletter, and it's followed by many importers, compliance professionals, and in-house counsel. And if you have not been subscribing to As the Customs and Trade World Turns, please do so. And at the end of this podcast, I'll ask James how you can access the newsletters and subscribe. So I will turn the microphone over pretty quickly to James. I have 5 very pretty specific questions. But before I start, welcome back, James, and I'm so delighted that you've had the time to spend with us this morning.
Thank you, Birgit. It's really a pleasure to be back on this podcast with you, and thank you again for inviting me. I think the title of this podcast, Summer of Tariffs, is really apt. There's a lot to discuss, so I'm very excited.
Yeah. I'm excited to have this conversation as well. So let's get into it. I will ask you, this very loaded question. What's the current state of affairs of tariffs under this administration? And I guess more specifically, what are you hearing from importers and how these tariffs are affecting them?
Yeah, Birgit. So, let me just, start with the bad news, which is, we get this question about the tariffs coming and going and, whether they're going to stick around. And, ultimately, I think it's kind of clear to everyone that the tariffs are, in fact, here to stay. If there's one thing that you can give President Trump credit for, whether you agree with him or not, is that he's really delivered on his campaign promises, or threats, some may call them, when it comes to trade. And I think, frankly, he's gone even further than anyone's expected. The amount of activity that we've just seen in the first half of 2025 is truly astonishing. I've been telling clients and colleagues, if just one of these actions had taken place, let's say, a big tariff hike on China or a new Section 232 auto investigation, that action would have sent shockwaves through the global supply chain for years. But right now we're dealing with dozens of major moves in the span of just a few months. We have reciprocal tariffs, the fentanyl tariffs that were issued under the IEEPA authority, automotive tariffs, Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, as well as expanded derivative products. And on top of all that, just this past month, new tariff letters are being sent out to the US trading partners. This is a level of churn that we haven't seen in a generation or maybe ever. So what does this mean in practical terms for importers? Well, one is that what we're seeing is that tariff rates are changing constantly. Products from certain countries may face a 10% tariff one week, but then a 50% tariff the other week if certain developments occur. So or maybe a White House issues a pause or a deal gets struck at the 11th hour. So it's really hard to keep up with. There's also new stacking rules when it comes to the tariffs that dictate which tariffs take priority over others. But this can be very complicated and can be even harder to operationalize for importers. So the impact for importers is that there's a lot of whiplash. It's not just cost, which is real and substantial, but it's really the day-to-day uncertainty. Which tariffs apply? What's the actual rate? What's coming next? Even for importers who are more sophisticated, it's really a moving target and can be very difficult. So again, the bottom line is that this new era of tariffs isn't going away. And if anything, we're only beginning to start seeing the long-term ripple effects. Many of these deals and then the retaliatory tariffs from other countries being announced, will I think take years, if not decades, to fully play out. So the biggest challenge for businesses is to really manage that uncertainty, keep options open, and stay as flexible as possible until things settle down, if they ever do.
I think maybe, James, it might be a good time right now, actually, to tell our listeners how to access the newsletter as the customs and the trade rule turns. Can they just simply Google your name and will they pop up?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it would. You can also search for the name, which we're quite proud of, as the Customs and Trade World Turns. We've gotten a lot of good feedback about it. But if you go to our website, we have an import customs compliance blog, and that's where all our latest editions of that newsletter are published. And then if you do add yourself to the mailing list, then you'll get it. It'll land straight into your inbox when they publish.
Let me be clear. It's the Aaron Fox Schiff Customs Import Compliance, and Google that on your browser.
Exactly, or just go to the website, the Customs and Import Compliance blog. That's right.
Got it. Thanks, James. These tariffs, these trade deals, these letters, I agree with you, the new lexicon, they impact almost the entire swath of the US economy and most of the important industries, and in particularly the electric vehicle and the battery industries here in North America, especially. The uncertainty and these, as you say, stacking tariffs, that must be very difficult for CEOs to try and manage, especially in this industry.
Yeah, especially for those in the EV and battery industries, they're being really hit hard with the impact of these tariffs. And, tariffs are coming at this sector from every angle. First of all, the tariff rates themselves are really staggering. When you add up the various layers, such as Section 301 on China, which first came down during the first Trump administration, then Section 232 on steel and aluminum content, and country-specific reciprocal tariffs. It's not hard to hit a effective tariff rate of 45% or even much higher on battery cells or other key components that are coming from China or other countries. And then with the new derivative inclusions process that's being administered by Commerce as it relates to steel and aluminum content, or some of these other sector-specific tariffs, that list of products could continue to grow. And then, of course, the speed and volume of the trade actions that are coming down are enough to really make your head spin. Just keeping up with which parts or materials are subject to which rate is almost a full-time job, and it is part of my full-time job, and even I have difficulty keeping up with it all. For example, there's a new Section 232 investigation on critical minerals. And then any day now, we could also see tariffs on 232 tariffs on semiconductors, copper products. There's also an investigation on heavy trucks and parts for those vehicles. So there's a lot going on. And at the same time, the administration is cutting deals with trading partners, sometimes lowering tariffs on certain goods in exchange for investment commitments. But it's not always clear how these deals are going to impact EVs specifically and their supply chain. A lot of the details are right now unclear or left for future negotiation, which means that companies will have to plan around various contingencies. So I think what this means for the industry is that there will be cost pressure up and down the chain. Margins are already tight in this industry, but then with tariffs, I think every sourcing and investment decision will get more scrutinized. There's also the continuing uncertainty, which is difficult to manage. And then, of course, investor pressure will grow, given that in this environment, investors will look for quicker returns and are more skeptical of kind of longer term payback projects if the rules can change. So there's a lot of volatility, and companies are having to model different cost scenarios. And I think until things stabilize, it's really important to stay nimble and build as much flexibility as you can into your supply chain.
And adding to all of that, we have the legislation called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and that has significantly rolled back the tax credits for the electric vehicle industry. I can imagine that this also is adding to the pressure and the cost pressure and the production pressure of companies in the EV value chain.
Absolutely. So that bill was just signed and went into effect July 4th on Independence Day. And what happened there, I mean, that bill did a lot of things, but as it relates to the EV tax credits, most of them will now be going away for new and used EVs, for commercial vehicles, for vehicles that are purchased after September 30th of 2025. And then in addition to that, federal subsidies for commercial EV charging stations are also being reduced or eliminated. So this is really difficult. It can be a difficult development on top of all the new tariffs. It's really like a 1-2 punch because costs are rising due to tariffs on batteries, critical minerals, steel and aluminum. And the thing that was helping offset some of those costs, through those federal tax credits are now disappearing. So this is creating a lot of pressure on the entire value chain. Every supplier, manufacturer, and downstream dealer of these products or distributor has to kind of rerun their numbers, and it really affects what's considered the total cost of ownership for EVs. What this also means is that the U.S. industry is really going to continue having to play catch up with China when it comes to the EV industry. China is well ahead. And even though a lot of these moves are intended to promote domestic production, that really doesn't happen overnight. You still have to rely on the international supply chain. So, until the U.S. gets, closes that gap between themselves and China, I think we're going to see costs go up, and then EV adoption may slow down as well. So, I think with everything kind of up in the air with costs, pricing, demand as it relates to the EV industry. It can be very difficult. So my advice is to really, double down on scenario planning and be ready to pivot as necessary, as policy winds shift.
So where are we on the US-Mexico-Canada agreement? That's still up for renegotiation next summer, I think, is the time when the negotiators get back to the table. But certainly an awful lot of conversations are being had about the USMCA within the three capitals, I imagine. Is there something in the USMCA now or what might emerge under a new agreement that would be particularly important in terms of companies and wanting to qualify their products?
Yes, so I'm just going to say first that the USMCA is up for review. There's a 6-year review that's set to occur next year. And it's still kind of early to tell what will come out of that. But one thing we do know right now is that the USMCA has become one of the last sort of safe harbors for North American manufacturers and importers. If you can prove that your goods are originating under the USMCA, you can save either in full or in part for a lot of these tariffs, including the Section 232 auto tariffs and the IEEPA fentanyl tariffs on Canada and Mexico. So that's a significant benefit. And, it's not clear still whether that's going to stick around or what's going to happen as a result of the renegotiation. But I think that the USMCA will be sort of at the center of a lot of the trade negotiations and the tariff negotiations between the US, Canada, and Mexico. So one word of caution, though, one thing that I'm seeing a lot from companies who want to use the USMCA to save on tariffs, especially for the ones that are kind of new to this agreement, it should be clear to them that it's not enough to just ship from Mexico or Canada to be USMCA compliant. The rules of origin can be stringent, especially for products like autos and parts. So you really have to make sure you comply with the rules, right? Gotta track your regional value content, if that applies, or if your supply chain includes, non-USMCA materials, then you have to factor all that in to make sure you are actually compliant with the rules. So you don't want to make assumptions. You have to do that sort of homework up front. There's also document and other compliance burdens that are involved. You need reliable certifications, clear audit trails. And I think with the tariff rules that are evolving and what's at stake, enforcement of all these rules is going to get more strict. And so the bottom line is that the USMCA continues to be a very powerful tool, but only if you've done that homework. So don't rely on assumptions. Treat qualification as a strategic process. Make sure you get your records right, and review your eligibility regularly because things can change. Supply chains can also change. So I think that's all very important work that you can do up front in order to save yourselves not just tariffs, but also any difficulties down the line.
A supply chain executive, James, who may be listening to this podcast, and I hope they are, will be asking himself or herself, what is it that I can do? What is it that I'm not doing now? Who should I be speaking to? Where are my vulnerabilities or the company's vulnerabilities? When you work with a company, what is it that you tell them they should be doing now to prepare for what we probably will see as the autumn of uncertainty?
Well, first thing, I'd probably send them our newsletter, have them sort of get up to date on everything that's happening. But I think that there are things that you can do proactively. And one thing to not do is to just wait for things to settle down, because that's not really a strategy anymore. things are changing so fast and the stakes are so high that you really have to engage in proactive risk management to stay ahead. So, some of the things that we've been recommending for CEOs and other supply chain leaders and companies. One is to really start by knowing your exposure. Get a good handle on every part SKU, every supplier that you have, every trade lane. Build a sort of tariff map for your business and then update it with every new announcement that comes. Look at your contracts. You want to build flexibility into them. Really make sure you know who pays when tariff rates go up. That's a question that's been something we've been getting a lot lately. Asking for advice on how to structure their supply contracts, and there's disputes that are happening because of the fact that these tariffs are sort of coming unexpected, and the question of who has to shoulder that cost. So really negotiate cost sharing and escalation clauses into these agreements, and revisit them often. Thirdly, I think you want to make sure you diversify your supply chain. If your supply chain is depending on just one country or one supplier, especially a high-risk country like China, then you really, really need backup options. The cost of switching may seem high, but the risk of getting caught flat-footed, I think, is much, much higher. Next, I think you really want to leverage every duty savings tool that is at your disposal. And I'm talking about things like foreign trade zones, bonded warehouses, first sale, tariff engineering. Now, not all these tools may be applicable in all cases, but really make sure you've done your homework to see if there are possibilities there, to save on tariffs. And then I think I'll just leave one last thought, which is to really make sure you work with strategic partners, whether that's outside trade counsel or other trade consultants. You don't have to go at it alone. And frankly, I wouldn't recommend it with how quickly things are moving. Find the experts who know this stuff and then follow their advice. So I think the way to cope with all this whiplash is to stay agile, keep learning, and then really, above all, treat trade as a core part of your business strategy, not just a cost center or a compliance box to check.
You mentioned find an expert. Obviously, James, you are an expert on these matters, and I thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. It is true that the trade developments and trade decisions are happening at a rapid pace. They are not expected to slow down. We do not know where all of this will end up, and that is why it's so important to stay apprised. If you want to speak to James directly, he can be reached at james.kim at afslaw.com. And he's given you how to find the newsletter. And again, the tagline, Smart in Your World, that appears on our website for us here at Aaron Fox Schiff. It is not simply a tagline, it is so much more. Thank you, James, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Birgit.
Thank you all.
Great job, guys.
I don't think